Well, the hate is gonna hate, 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 and the faker's gonna fake, 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 baby. I'm just gonna make, making luck, a Dominion podcast. Welcome to Making Luck,
Who can have enough? Yeah.
a chicken
hi.
nugget podcast.
Yeah. How's it going?
I'm still alive, man, and I may or may not be
That's all we can
recovering.
hope for.
Yeah, it really beats the alternative. I didn't get medevac.
Yeah. Did that lung grow back yet?
I don't think so. You know, I'm supposed to run a Tough Mudder this weekend. Like, is that gonna happen?
God, no. Why would you think that you were going to be able to do that?
I don't know, man, but... Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God. Dude, you literally had a near-death experience. Now is not the time to be running races.
Having another near-death experience?
Yeah, I don't know, like, why you push yourself to the brink of physical exhaustion.
I wanted to test myself physically.
Why?
Because I wanted to see if that was something I could do.
Okay, and what is that information going to do for you?
I wanted to know how I could do it. It makes me
Now
feel
you know.
better. And now I know, yeah. Do I want to do it again? Probably not.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, at least you know what it's like, and
Yeah.
I assume you don't regret it.
Definitely not. I was hoping next episode I actually do plan to go a little bit in depth about my experience because it is relevant to the topic of next episode, but not this episode.
Yeah, this episode is going to be about
Green speed,
Winder's fashion tips.
Yeah, green speed.
Yeah.
It's actually a pretty sweet mini, so it's been recorded for a while, and yeah, it's pretty funny.
So it's a mini-sode for a few reasons.
Yeah.
One of them is that Gen Con is this weekend. So I'm gonna be there. Adam is not, but hit me up. I am happy to chill out. We can play some Dominion. I'll be cosplayed as Lord Raddington. Like I do every year. And so that'll be fun.
Yeah, and I'm gonna apparently try and run a Tough Mudder.
Yeah, Adam is gonna be trying to kill himself again.
Yeah. Also, I've got friends staying with us, and they brought their 4 children. So yeah, recording podcast is that ain't happening.
Right.
There are 5 children in this house, and that's a lot of children.
And none of them are Adam.
None of them are me.
Yeah.
5 children plus me.
Yeah.
So that's great, but yeah, it's Minisode. And also, like, man, I am super not ready, and
Sure.
who knows when I'm going to be ready. But I will say this, next episode will be a normal episode. I'm going to really, really try to get through some games with that Page Kingdom. I'm not looking forward to playing that Page Kingdom.
I forgot we had to do that.
But also, like, I'm just not looking forward to doing anything competitive right now. I'm still pretty out of that scene. But the topic of the next episode, I think, is going to be nice and relevant. It's going to be appropriate to not only Dominion, but it's more of a conceptual episode, and I think it applies to a lot of life, much like a lot of this podcast. Wouldn't you say, Jake?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of joke a little bit, a lot of life, but whatever. Take from it what you will. At the very least, what we're going to be covers a lot of gaming, especially competitive gaming.
Yes.
So, we'll get into that, and it'll be a good episode, I think.
I really hope my my compatriots from Survivor can tune in for that episode. I'll be spamming it to them shamelessly. None of them have ever heard of Dominion, but hopefully they'll listen to the podcast, and and hopefully the people who listen to the podcast can get a little bit of light on what I went through, because I want to talk about it. But also, I think applying the same principles to other games and seeing what applies and what doesn't and why is very enlightening when it comes to applying those things to the way you approach Dominion. So I'm definitely looking forward to recording that episode, and then at that point, we can also talk about the immediate future of the podcast. But man, like, it was a life-changing experience for me. My life will be changed. The podcast isn't over. It's not going to be over, but a break,
Yeah,
please.
right.
Oh
We
man,
all need one sometimes.
yeah. But yes, there will be lots more discussion then. Hope you enjoy the mini-sode. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being patient. I'm going to try and be on the Discord more often now. I'll do my best.
And welcome to Making Luck, a Dominion podcast.
About a card game.
Yeah.
Making Luck Minisode. This is Wandering Winder welcoming you to another minisode of Making Luck, a golf podcast. Why a golf podcast? Because today we're talking about green speed. Well, Johnny, I think that's more of a pro wrestling announcer than a golf commentator. Are you sure you know what you're talking about? Anyway, green speed, what do I mean by that? I mean, how fast do you green? How fast do you go for victory points when you start that process? How fast do you do it? Things like that. So, when do you start greening? That's the question that I want to talk about today. And this is basically part 2 of our 873 million part series on endgame play. So it's for sure not the be all and end all, but hopefully it's a helpful extra piece of knowledge to chink in your armor and mix metaphors with. Okay, great. So the first question is, when do you start thinking about this kind of thing? And you can think about it from the start of the game. There are some strategic impacts that this kind of thing has, but in general, that's not really when you need to start thinking about it. Different people, it works differently, when they want to start thinking about this stuff. But in general, I think for the most part, you want to kind of try to start thinking about this when your deck gets to the point where it's humming along, kind of doing what it's wanting to do, and or just when you would normally think, should I green now or should I green later? Obviously, you don't want to think about it too late, because if the answer was you should have greened 2 turns ago, then you might have some troubles. But hopefully the rest of this conversation will help give you some clarifying thoughts on that. Let's start with the basic mantra: points, the points you get by the end of the game, equals payload by time, or multiplied by time, or times time. Times time sounds a little weird. I'm a little weird. Anyway, points equals payload by time. So, right, basically, let's start with the simplified case, and probably mostly for this episode, we're going to stick with the simplified case and branch out from there. So let's just say you've got 1 relative point card. I'm mostly going to be talking about provinces here, but the same thing can apply to colony, can apply to dominate, I guess can apply to some other things. But we're assuming that there's not some other stack or way of getting victory points that's like going to be significant, which probably isn't a great assumption. Certainly on some boards, and probably on a lot of boards, isn't a great assumption. But as a baseline first approximation, it helps you start to think about some of this stuff. So we're going to start with that, and then I'll get a little bit into why and how that assumption kind of fails. But let's just think, okay, right now there's provinces, and that's the only kind of points that matter. If you win the province split, you're going to win the game. So you want to be able to get to half plus 1 of this victory card. Or if you get to half, then some tiebreaker stuff comes in. But you certainly don't want your opponent to get to half plus 1 before you get to half, and you'd like to get to half plus 1 before they do. So it's kind of a race to half or half plus 1, so you're racing to 4 or 5 provinces. So the questions that we're trying to answer here are, how fast do you green? Like, how many green cards do you get at a time? When do you start greening? These are obviously related questions. Or another way to put it is, how much do you build, right? Because building more is going to mean that you're greening faster, but you're starting to green later, versus building less, you're greening earlier, but you're greening slower. So that's kind of the trade-off, right? And like I said, points equals payload by time. And we're trying to get to half or slightly more than half first. So if your payload comes out to 1 province per turn, so 8 money to buy, it's going to take you 4 turns to get to 4 provinces, or it's going to take you 5 turns to get to 5, right? If you move up to 2 provinces per turn, then it's going to take you 2 turns, right? 4 divided by 2 is 2 turns. Or if you're trying to get to 5, it's going to take 3 turns, because 5 divided by 2 is more than 2. And since fractional turns, basically, you're not going to get there, right? Basically, here it's a ceiling function. You always have to round up. So if you're to 2 provinces a turn, then it's going to take you 2 turns to get to 4, 3 turns to get to 5. 3 provinces a turn still takes you 2 turns to get to 4, only takes you 2 turns to get to 5. 4 provinces a turn only takes you 1 turn to get to 4, 2 turns still to get to 5. 5 provinces a turn, it's 1 turn. If you're getting more than 5 provinces a turn, then it's really kind of a moot question, because you're just going for a mega turn and you're getting more than halfway there in your 1 turn. So, okay, that's a bunch of turns. It's simple math, right? You're just dividing, right? Number of provinces divided by my payload gives you how many turns it's going to take, right? It's like velocity, right? How much distance I'm covering. In this case, distance is number of provinces. Your velocity is provinces per turn, or your payload, basically. And then you get the time, which is how many turns does it take. Now, normally, like we've said before, time in Dominion is measured in shuffles, but when you're greening and the game can end, or can effectively end, because there aren't enough of the points left, that is kind of the case where the actual turn-by-turn bit matters more than the shuffles. Of course, the other way that it matters is if your shuffles are desynced from each other, but that's a bit of a digression. Anyway, so it's basically simple division here, and really there's a very simple conclusion that you start from the baseline, and you should generally be thinking about this before you get, or as you're getting to this point where you could get a province per turn. You start from that baseline and think, is it worth it to build more to try to get 2 provinces a turn? Should I roughly stop building now and just go for 1 province per turn? And the question that you have to ask yourself, the main question, is how long is it going to take me to add the payload I need to go from 1 province to 2 provinces? And if it's going to take more than 2 turns, then you should probably just go for 1 province. If it's going to take less than 2 turns, then you should definitely keep building. If it's going to take exactly 2 turns, then you're about even, and we'll go into a bit here, but basically if you're about even, then usually building more wins most of the tiebreakers. There are some exceptions, and we'll get into kind of why that is in a minute. But the important thing here is to note, when I'm talking about building, I don't just mean I'm strictly adding payload cards to my deck, because you need to be able to draw and play those payload cards, right? So typically this is going to come up most often when you're actually drawing your whole deck. And if you're not drawing your whole deck or close to your whole deck, then if you're either not going for that, basically, then you should, kind of green how we talked about with money decks, which is kind of green when you can, and you're not really going to get to multi-province turns reliably or consistently, so don't aim for that. So this is mostly for these consistently drawing kinds of decks. And if you're in one of those kinds of decks, you can't just add payload. You need to continue to add the deck control, in particular the draw, that is both ways to continue increasing your hand size. And if you're adding more terminals, you need to add more village support so you get more terminal space, that kind of thing. You need to be able to do that as you're building. But even if you are not building extra payload, you're going to need to be able to increase at least the draw part, maybe not so much the village, but at least the draw, because your deck is going to get thicker as you green, because you're adding these green cards to it. So either way, it's something you need to think about, and it's going to be slightly different either way, of course. So that's what we mean, or that's what I mean when I'm talking about when you're talking about stopping building. But basically, there's this kind of two turn cutoff. If it's going to take you more than 2 turns to go from single to double, just stick with single. If it's going to take you less, definitely build more. If it's going to take you exactly 2 turns, then usually build more, but we'll get more into the details there. So this is kind of 2 turn rule of thumb, and of course there's going to be a lot of exceptions here, but that's your basic rule of thumb in terms of going from 1 province a turn to 2 provinces a turn. And again, this extends to colonies, this extends to dominate, this extends to any time there's just the one source of VP that you're worried about. And assuming that source ends the game, at least, I guess. Things start to get a little bit different when that source of points doesn't end the game, because then you've run out those points and it's like, okay, well, now what? But we'll cover that in a different episode, different minisode, different topic. Like I said, 873 million part series. So that's a precise number, by the way, 873 million exactly. I've mapped that out. Anyway, so what other concerns are there other than this? And should you ever build past 2 provinces a turn? Well, going from double province to triple province is something that you usually don't do. It's not worth more than 1 turn. Some of the reasons we're going to talk about later that tiebreaker goes to building more are still going to apply for going from double to triple, but usually going to from double to triple is something that you very rarely do, and it's usually going to be the case that the payload is just so fantastic that it's easy. And in those cases, a lot of times it's, again, you're more talking about a megaturn, or mini megaturn. I guess I'm calling that a mini-turn, mini mega. Anyway, where you're getting a lot at once because you have some kind of a cost reduction effect or horn of plenty or something, right? That as soon as you get one, it's very easy to add like multiple more. And it's just getting the critical mass that's the hard part to start. So kind of double province usually tends to be kind of the sweet spot here. But again, it depends on how fast you can add your payload. If you can go from 2 provinces to 3 provinces per turn in less than a turn, then that's usually really good. It's just that usually you can't do that because it requires some really good payload to be able to. But anyway, let's talk about some other considerations that come into play other than just the straightforward how long will it take me to build this payload. And I guess I should talk for a minute about figuring out how long that actually will take you. It's usually not that hard once you get to this point where you're drawing your deck and you can buy a province. You just have to think, okay, how much extra draw am I going to need to be able to support this? And then what is the most efficient way to add the money and buys that I would need? So one of the very common ways, maybe not the usual, one of the common reasons why you wouldn't want to build past a single province per turn is if plus buy is hard to come by. So maybe gains, cost limited gains, say like a workshop or ironworks kind of effect, where you can gain something costs up to 4, maybe up to 5, or up to 6 even, or you can only gain an action, some kind of very limited gainer. Maybe you have that, but if plus buys are either difficult or impossible to come by, let's say the only plus buy is ruined market, well, that's going to be real hard to make it efficient enough to go from single to double when you have to get a ruined market and then you have to get so much extra payload. So that's usually not something you're doing if plus buy is hard to come by. Even sometimes if the plus buy is just too weak of a card, if you're just like getting a nomad camp and shoving it in your deck, that's not a great way to get extra buys. So okay, sometimes it's still worth it because the rest of the payload is strong enough, but often it's not. But basically, you have to figure out what are all the different payload options. What's the most efficient for if I'm adding my deck to get me from 8 money to 16 money, or from 10 money to 20 money, or whatever it is. That obviously, because you also need to be increasing your draw, or your reliability is going to hurt. So anyway, so that's kind of the speed thing there. And so it's like, if you have to add golds, and I can add 1 gold this turn and 2 golds next turn, and I already have the extra buys, then 1 gold this turn and 2 golds next turn is enough money, right? That's 9 money. Then I can do that. If, that'd be, if you're at like 12 money now, so you can, I don't know. I don't know. You just have to figure out, you come to the end of your turn, you figure out how much money do I have now? Can I buy something now and something next turn? And that will get me from the single province point to the double province point. I have this much money now. If I buy something now, how much money am I going to have next turn? And if I do that, how much money, what things can I buy next turn that the turn after I'll be able to double province? Keeping in mind that you have to keep your draw up as you're adding all these payload cards. So those are the kinds of questions you're talking about. But we're already bleeding into my next section, which is other relevant considerations, and the first of those is reliability, right? You need to be able to keep your draw up. So if you build less, that necessarily means that you're going to be greening slower, you're going to be greening longer, and if you're greening longer, then you have more chances to dud while you're greening. On the other hand, you can also dud while you're building. So this is not a strict dichotomy, right? So as I was talking about, you want to keep padding your draw. Now there's a few different ways that you might want to try to react to not being able to basically to adding your draw. You can either, first of all, add your draw before you start greening. So let's say I could single province now, but if I single province now, then I can't keep adding components that are going to help my draw, and then I'm not going to be very reliable once I greening because I'm barely reliable now, and then I add 3 green cards to my deck, I'm not reliable anymore, right? So way one is just add extra draw up front, and this has the nice benefit of you're going to be like extra reliable at the start. So that's a nice thing. So that's the first way that you can be adding the reliability. The second way is you keep adding more draw components as you continue to green. So I'm going to get a province and a village and a smithy. Usually if you can do that, then you're going to be able to, you have 3 buys, you have enough money almost to be able to double province. So usually you should be able to go for that. And again, maybe more with this, you go for that and build a little bit of extra draw at the start. And so that helps you be reliable. But if for instance there are those kind of gainers that we talked about earlier, that'd be a way that you might not build to extra provinces, but can still keep adding more draw cards as you go. So that's something to think about. And then the last way that you can deal with this reliability issue is, in some cases, you just be okay with, well, there's going to be some pretty decent chance that I have a dud turn. And so instead of 1 province per turn, I'm going to get 4 provinces in 4 turns. I've got a 25% chance of dudding. It's going to take me 5 turns on average. Or I've got a 10% chance of dudding now, but by the time I have 3 provinces in my deck, it's going to be up to 40%. So it averages out to about 25%, right? So something like that. In some cases, the most efficient way to deal with it is just saying, well, it would take me so many turns to prevent dudding by making myself more reliable now that I should just green and accept the dud because the number of dud turns will be less than the number of turns that I'm investing in increasing my reliability. So that's the third way that you can deal with this issue. Which way is right is going to depend from game to game, from board to board, and this actually also brings me to the next kind of other consideration, which is what is your opponent doing? So sometimes you can afford to be a little bit more protecting against the bad case scenarios, protecting against being unreliable, trying to maintain 90% reliability instead of 60% reliability. Sometimes you can do that. Sometimes you can't, because you just have to say, well, my opponent is very close to me, very close to tied with me, and more often than not, I'm going to get through this without dudding, even though 45% of the time I'm going to dud. And so that's very risky and unreliable. But if 45% of the time I'm going to dud, my opponent is doing the same thing, 55% of the time they're not going to dud. If I build more, I'm a turn behind. and most of the time they're going to make it through, even if a lot of the time they don't. So that's a consideration also. And there's a whole lot of other ways you have to understand what your opponent's doing. Um, and then the last kind of other relevant factor that I want to talk about, still working within this paradigm, is tiebreaker points. So building more, and this is the main reason why, if you're going for, from 1 to 2 provinces takes you 2 turns. This is the main reason why you usually want to build to more, is the tiebreaker points. And that is to say, if you're building towards um, double province, then you're more likely to be able to handle tiebreaker points better. What do I mean by tiebreaker points? I mean, if you both get to 4 provinces at the same time, then whoever has more of the other points is going to win, even if it's just in a state. Like, you only need to win by 1, right? Or you gain a duchy, or you hold off for a turn because, if I province now, then they province in return, then I lose. So I'm going to get a duchy now, or I'm going to get province duchy now instead of double province, or something like that, right? Um, the player that's built more is usually more able to adjust to that kind of scenario where they're dancing around a little bit, the game ending with that pile depleting, usually. So that's kind of the big reason why you generally err on the side of building too much rather than building too little. So all of these tiebreaker points, well, not all of them. For the most part, most of them lead you toward building more, greening faster, greening later. But there are some cases, for instance, you're running out of village support and you can't really keep adding the extra villages that you're going to need to be able to still be reliable if you go for double province. So you need to conserve your villages, or if the buy is tough, or if the reliability factor is such a way that it's actually better reliability wise to green sooner, then that's also going to be a thing. Um, so that's the basics, and then a few more caveats to point out. So there's other things that can kind of wreck this a lot. The biggest one is other point sources. So even duchies, sometimes you can get 4 duchies that overcomes a 2 province deficit. So like, this is always at least somewhat of a factor. If it's just like duchies, then it's not usually a big factor, other than the tiebreaker scenario I talked about before, because it's not that common that you're going to be able to get, 4 duchies plus and continue to get the draw and be able to overcome your opponent that got 5 provinces because they greened a little bit faster. That's not usually going to happen with just duchies. But if there's some other significant source of points, whether it's a landmark or VP chips or some kind of quote-unquote alt VP card, there can be a lot of those. All of those things can throw a wrench into this whole thing, and those would deserve a separate episode, which hopefully you'll get at some later point in this 873 million part series. Probably more than one of those parts is on this. The other major caveat is piles running out. If 3 piles run out, the game ends, and so you need to be able to account for that. Sometimes that means building more so that you can have control over that. Sometimes that means greening faster. Instead, though, because a pile out doesn't matter if it can't be done with the lead. So that's something else to think about, and that's again more interplay, which again would be its own separate episode, but that's there as well. The other thing is cards that care specifically about your deck contents. So if it's good particularly or bad particularly to have the green cards in your deck. So bad particularly would be something where you really want to have your deck is going to fall apart if it gets green cards in it. So you have some way of drawing specific cards or specific types of cards. So we're talking about something like a herald or a vassal, or I guess apothecary, or certain draw to X cards, right? Those can't deal with green cards very well, so they're going to want to try to skew more towards building more. Alternatively, though, there's some things that would have you green sooner. So we're talking about crossroads, we're talking about shepherd, we're talking about the opponent having tournament. Sorry, Adam, tournament does exist. If your opponent has tournament, that you're going to want to usually get your province faster. Well, if you have tournament, you're usually going to get your province faster too. But if your opponent has tournament, you have tournament, you get your province faster, you can set up your own tournaments better, you can block your opponent more. So that tends to you getting those provinces a little bit faster. Anyway, this is one of the shorter mini-sodes because it's, just one part in the series, but I just want to leave with one of the first things I started with, which is just again to reiterate, points equals the time multiplied by the payload, and the payload in this case is measured not necessarily in coins, but in the points per turn that you're getting. So you think about how long will it take me to go from single to double? How long will it take me to go from double to triple? Is the amount of time that I'm investing now going to be worth it in the end? And you kind of just have to figure out, okay, well, how long is this game actually going to last? If it's only going to be 3 more turns, then I don't want to invest 1 turn maybe. I certainly don't want to invest 2 turns, right? So anyway, that's kind of this super simple thing to think about, but I find it helpful. Hopefully you can find it helpful too. Your points at the end of the game is going to be the number of turns you spent buying points times how many points per turn you were getting over that time. That can also be applied to money decks, but usually you don't have so much control in money decks. Usually the rule of thumb there is just kind of green when you can, with some exceptions, but that's more of a separate issue because you're not really building to multi-province turns in money decks so much. You could incorporate the fractional. Anyway, I'm getting off topic here. The point is, this is the kind of stuff you want to be thinking about when you're talking about how much should you build, and whether or not you should keep building. Don't build just because, well, I should keep building more and building is good. Do think about how much time it's going to take, but also keep in mind that all those tiebreakers usually go towards building more, and if it only takes a couple turns to go from single to double, then that can well be worth it, and occasionally even going past double. But double in these kinds of decks tends to kind of be a sweet spot. It's either single or double, and double is most often right if piles and other points and all of that stuff aren't an issue, which again, think about that too. Anyway, enough of me rambling. We'll be back next time, both on Making Luck, both on the minisodes, and on our next number 3 in our sequence of 873 million episodes on the subject of endgame play. But that'll do it for this one. This is Wandering Winder signing off.
All right, I finished my chicken nuggets.
Ooh, nice. How many chicken nuggets were there?
You're asking at the wrong time.
Oh, some number, and now we'll never know.
Now it's 0. Was I supposed to take inventory before I started eating?
Well, I mean, if you went to McDonald's and ordered a 10-piece nugget, you might know how many nuggets you started with.
Yeah, but that's not what I did.
Oh, okay. Sorry, man.
In fact, it's quite the opposite.
Oh, so you went to McDonald's and you gave them a 10-piece nugget.
Yeah.
Nice. That was very considerate of you.
Yeah, I figured they could use them. They seem pretty into those.
They do. And they clearly don't have enough.
Yeah.
Welcome to Making Luck.
Who can have enough? Yeah. Oh,
a chicken nugget podcast.
Yeah. How's it going?